Right.
You can't go far wrong if you've got the customer at heart of what you're thinking of. And I think we get too lost in ideas and product ideas and concepts and don't really think enough about what problem we're trying to solve here.
Mm-hmm.
And all the best products that I've seen get to market are solving a problem for customers. So we've got to get much more customer centric.
Welcome to the Innovate Podcast, the show where we discuss, dissect and attempt to rebuild the world of innovation within consumer goods. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by April Preston, Global Product Director at Holland Barrett, and before that, Director of Product Development at Marks & Spencer's, and many, many other roles in the food and drink industry. I think it's fair to say one of the legends of product innovation within the food industry for sure. April, welcome to the Innovate Podcast. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you, Ben. Lovely to be here. Delighted you asked me.
I'm looking forward to the discussion. It'll be very interesting, I'm sure. I think to start with, it would be useful to some of the listeners that don't know you, just to kind of run through your background first of all, and then we'll get into some rapid fire questions after that, before getting stuck into the kind of the meaty innovation topics. So yeah, tell us a bit about yourself, April.
Okay, well, I'm going to do the very, very potted version because there's 35 years of it to go through. So basically, single thread throughout my career to date has been food. I've pretty much done multiple roles in the food industry, starting off in hospitality, running restaurants. I've been in retail, food retail. I've been in food manufacturing. I've done transformation projects. I've worked at Harrods, Holland Barrett, Marks & Spencer's, Two Sisters Food Group, all of them in product development, innovation, and food leadership roles. So I've got lots and lots of views that I'd love to share today.
Very good. Quite the impressive CV for sure. So I think, one of the things that would be interesting, and I know you're relatively early days in your kind of new role at Holland Barrett, but just maybe we'll be looking to kind of see what your views are on some of the comparisons between food and drink that you know so well versus health and wellness. But we'll get into that in due course. Yeah. To start the podcast episodes, we always kind of run through just some rapid fire questions so the listeners can kind of get to know you a little bit more. The first one, what's your, I follow you on Instagram. You eat out extensively. I would say you have a very, very strong knowledge of the UK restaurant scene. What's your favourite town or city in the UK for food at the moment?
Well, I just want to add, Ben, eating out is part of my work. It's research and development, so it's not just I eat out for fun. I'm going to have to be really predictable and say London. I know you'd love me to say Manchester, but Manchester is really, really, there's some exciting stuff going on there. But just the volume of new restaurant openings in London is incredible. And I read every single newsletter there is, and there are probably 20, 30 restaurants opening in London for one in any other big city in the UK. So, I mean, that's where the variety is. If you'd asked me world, I probably would have said Tel Aviv.
Okay.
Because honestly, the food there is incredible if you've never been. But if you're saying UK, it's London.
Right. Okay. And what would your kind of it's a bit cliche, but your kind of death row final meal be?
It's never changed, actually. Well, when I started drinking at the age of 18, obviously, but it would be a beautiful bottle of red wine, probably Northern Rhone, some Spanish Marcona almonds, some really beautiful vintage cheddar, and some very sweet and juicy grapes. I'm just thinking about it now. It's breakfast time, but honestly, I could eat it any time of the day. It's just such a wonderful array of foods to eat together.
And you probably get asked this a lot, given your standing in the food industry. But when kind of younger people looking to build a career in the food industry approach you and ask you about it, what do you say to them? How do you counsel them when they're considering joining the food industry?
Well, I would say do it. Obviously, I've spent my whole career in the food industry, and there's so much variety. I mean, I think the thing is, food is the universal language. Everybody on this planet has to eat. So you're never going to be short of inspiration, of a job, basically. And I think really get to understand the variety within the industry. I mean, when I started, I was in restaurants. That was the only food industry I knew. I knew I wanted to work with food. But honestly, having done 35 years now, I know that there's such a breadth and there's something for everyone.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously you've been in the sector for a long time now, but do you, if you hadn't have landed in the food industry, do you know where you would have loved to maybe spend your career as an alternative?
Well, when I was young, I always wanted to be an extra in disaster movies. In the mid-70s, there were a lot of films like The Poseidon Adventure and Towering Inferno, and I wanted to be one of those people that ran around in the background. I'm slightly joking, but I'm a bit of an oxymoron in that I'm an introvert, but I'm quite a sort of animated, passionate introvert, and I've always hated public speaking. But what I've started to enjoy recently is I've done quite a lot of hosting of live shows to customers, etc. And I've been working with Andy Peters and Fred Siriax, and I absolutely love that. So I think I'd like to be a TV presenter, Ben, if I wasn't. Which is very odd, bearing in mind I am an introvert. Don't know where that comes from.
With a sideline in disaster movie. Yeah, very good. Okay, perfect. Well, let's get into the kind of the main topic of the podcast. So we're going to look at the world of product innovation broadly within consumer goods. Obviously, there'll be a food and drink focus, and we'll kind of touch on health and wellness as well. But we'll try and kind of pick it apart and maybe visualize what it could look like in 5 years from now. Just think what innovation needs to do to kind of get fit for purpose, particularly in the current climate of the cost of living crisis. So, I guess one of the kind of the areas that I like to start is to get your observations on we'll start with the food and drink innovation sector first of all. If you had to score it out of 10 for impact, what score would you give it and why?
Well, I was thinking about this earlier. I don't think you can give it one score because it's such a varied industry. If you look at what's happened over the last couple of years and you look at the restaurant industry and hospitality, for example, and I absolutely hate the word, but the way that they pivoted so quickly when we went into lockdown, I'd give them 10 out of 10 for that.
Yeah.
A lot of the small startups and the brands that are coming through, really, really innovative. I think where I'd give more of a 1 or a 2 out of 10 is in some of the big food retailers that are basically just churning at the moment and not really innovating. So lots of great NPD coming through, but not stuff that's really going to shift the dial in terms of impact. Right.
Okay. Interesting.
So, and I'm looking at myself there because obviously I'm part of that industry, but we can talk about that later.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So what kind of looking at the sector as a whole over the past maybe not a couple of years, because obviously it's been COVID and that's been a fairly unique dynamic, maybe kind of 5-10 years prior. What do you think the industry as a whole could do better when it comes to product innovation? And let's maybe focus on kind of retail, mass market retail.
I think we've just got to keep the customer at the heart of what we do. You can't go far wrong if you've got the customer at heart of what you're thinking of. And I think we get too lost in ideas and product ideas and concepts and don't really think enough about what problem we're trying to solve here. And all the best products that I've seen get to market are solving a problem for customers. So we've got to get much more customer centric. I then think we sort of have this swing between overusing data or overusing gut feel. And for me, great product development comes as a good mix of the two. So, really, really good data that's customer focused with experience, gut feel, and not being too bound by the results that you get. Otherwise, you'll just do what you've always done.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, there's a number of, I think, areas of the sector that I see kind of flip-flopping between the two, or going too heavy on data or too heavy on gut feel. That's really interesting observation. How do you feel that the innovation process, I guess, has changed over your time in the consumer goods sector, both kind of looking back at, say, Two Sisters, for example, and your time at Marks and Spencer's?
I don't think the innovation process has changed enough. I think the requirement to get to market has speeded up beyond recognition. Social media, the digital world, trends come and go so quickly that we really, really need to act with pace now. And I know we've talked about it before, Ben, but honestly, I've never seen customer behavior change so quickly as it has in the last couple of years with pandemic and COVID. But yet the way that most companies still do innovation is exactly the same. And I think it needs a good shake up, basically.
So you mentioned time to market there. I mean, if we kind of look back, 10, 15 years versus now, how has that time changed, and where do you think it needs to get to if you think the industry is still too slow?
I mean, really, if we're talking about getting food products to market, I think you need to be on a sort of 4 to 6 month timeline maximum. I mean, I'd love to get it down to 1 or 2 months, but I haven't quite worked out how to do that exactly yet. Right. But I feel there's something in much more of a test and learn mentality. I think we try and achieve perfection before we hit market. And I think if we can bring that test and learn pre-launching, that's even better. So an iterative approach with customers, pre-launch, but then launch and then iterate until you get it spot on. Because I think what the industry tends to do, try and perfect something, which takes a long time, take it into the market, doesn't resonate with customers, give up on it, throw that one out and come on to a new idea. And I think there's probably some brilliant products and concepts that have had huge potential that were given up on far too early. So that deep understanding of why things weren't quite right, because it could have just been one element that wasn't right.
Yeah, that's interesting. That one shot approach is quite unique to food and drink, because if you look at, say, fast fashion, you've got businesses like Zara, like the Chinese e-commerce business Shein, that they've got a kind of a 3 to 4 week time to market, but they don't go and produce 100,000 units of a particular garment. They'll do 500, 1,000, and if it's showing promise, then they'll kind of iterate and further commit from there. And I think that approach is something that food and drink can learn from.
I definitely do, and I think the beauty of where I'm at Holland Barrett at the moment is we've got a really good approach to testing and learning in just a handful of stores, because we've actually got 1,800 stores, but really test the concept and then start to roll it out, and hopefully we can start to speed things up in that way.
Right. Okay. That's interesting. So it's early days for you at Holland and Barrett. You've only been there a handful of months, but
8 weeks, Ben. 8 weeks.
8 weeks. Okay, even less than that. Do you have any kind of headline views in terms of the differences between innovation, product development approaches within food and drink and your new sector?
Well, I think in the new sector there is, definitely at Holland Barrett, there's an openness to doing things differently, which is brilliant, because I might, in my whole career now, have the opportunity to do my best work in terms of try some of the things that I've wanted to try before. I think if you look at the health and wellness sector versus food, the biggest challenge is it's so heavily regulated in terms of what you can say, the claims you can make. And, luckily for us at Holland Barrett, we've got a really great team of medics, scientists, regulatory affairs people that can really make sure that every claim we want to make is cemented in science, medicine, is legal, and that will speed us up because we've got that in-house resource. The bit that we need to get right is really understanding what are the motivating claims to make with customers. And that's, I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about Vypr, but that's exactly where Vypr would do a brilliant job for us, because we can test a number of different things to talk about very quickly and come to the right conclusions.
Right. Okay. No, that's interesting. And just give a sense of scale between the kind of the volume of MPD at, say, Marks and Spencer's and the volume of MPD in Holland and Barrett. Is it more concentrated where you are now, and therefore what implications does that have?
Well, it's interesting because Holland Barrett have never had a product development team. So the team that I'm creating there, the global product team, is brand new. Okay. And historically at Holland and Barrett, obviously it's been an edit of a lot of great health and wellness brands with a little bit of own label. And what we're going to do, bringing this crack team into Holland Barrett, is create a fantastic own label health and wellness range that I think will really shake up the market. Okay.
And we as we stand today, we're recording this in early July. We are in the midst of what looks like quite a substantial cost of living crisis, which is probably only going to get worse, unfortunately, certainly for the next 6 months and on into next year. What do you think it will mean for food and drink, first of all, in terms of again, food and drink retail and on innovation within that?
I mean, I think it's going to affect everything. You know, it's already permeating our lives. I think when a cost of living crisis hits or an economic crisis, I think the temptation is to slow down on innovation.
Yeah.
But actually, I think we need to do exactly the opposite and potentially take a few more risks and try a few more things if we're going to be successful.
Right. Okay.
The key for me to unlocking it is really understanding, first of all, what category is going to be hit the most, because it's quite often it's not what you think. I mean, I've inherited some new businesses now. I've always focused on food, but I'm now looking after beauty and supplements as well. And you'll be familiar with the lipstick effect, where people still spend on luxury goods, but they scale it down. So rather than buying a fur coat, not that you would nowadays, but they might buy a lipstick instead.
Right. Okay.
I think it's really understanding how customers will, what categories will they still buy into, and what are the alternatives? I mean, the last time we had an economic crisis, then premium food did quite well because people stopped going to restaurants. So I think that'll be interesting. The key for me is, or what I'm starting to see already with the way customers are behaving, is they're setting themselves a monthly budget. And they're sticking to that. You know, you see people going through the tills at the supermarket saying, when I hit £40, please stop. I'm not taking the rest of that shopping. And I think the secret to innovation will be really understanding how we can help customers stick to that budget. And I'm not talking the obvious, let's create a basics range. I've got a few other little secrets that I'm not going to share that could really help customers stick to their budgets and really support them when they're trying to control their costs.
So it's innovation. It's an opportunity for innovation, but one that needs to be mindful of the fact that budgets are going to be constrained for a period of time, for sure.
Yeah, and I think it's not making assumptions. You know, the obvious thing you hear in retail when there's an economic crisis, let's lower our prices and create a budget range. I don't think that's what the secret is. I think we really need to understand customers' mindsets and what problems they need solving. And the problem they need solving is, how do they stick to budget?
Right. Okay. And there'll be a number of listeners from the food service sector as well within this. You've obviously still got an extensive network within the restaurant sector. What would you be saying to either entrepreneurs or restaurant owners coming to you, kind of looking for advice in terms of how they set themselves up to succeed in the next year?
Well, I think it's the same thing. I think it's coming up with a model where you can really, really control costs so you can give customers the best value for money possible. And I think, a lot of, it's almost, it's almost like we had a crystal ball with COVID in terms of the way that restaurants pivoted and set up home delivery and dark kitchens and all of those things that where you can really get a restaurant quality meal at home for great value. I think that will continue to be a rich seam of growth for the hospitality industry.
Let's just have a look about innovation in terms of kind of where it's come from and where you think it needs to go in terms of things like structure and process and technology, because certainly my time in the consumer goods sector since the early noughties, stage and gate has been the kind of the fundamental development process within there, and it still seems to be, it's not the default, but it still seems to be a backbone of most kind of retailers' innovation processes. Do you think that needs to change, or do you think there are some fundamental kind of strengths of stage and gate that will remain part of process moving forward, and how do you see process evolving?
I think stage and gate, it gets often confused with very admin heavy processes that slow businesses down. Stage and gate at its simplest is just making the right decisions at the right time. And you could, in theory, if you had the right information and the right people, do that in 5 days. And I think what we've got to do, I actually think it's a very thorough way of looking at things. And it can speed you up rather than slow you down, because if you don't follow that decision process, you end up doing lots of rework. So I think stage and gate probably, certainly in my businesses, I would keep that, but I would be looking for ways to speed that up. I'd be looking for ways to bring more objectivity into it rather than subjectivity. getting data at the right points, and every step of the way bring it back to the customer. And right from the beginning, what's the proposition, what problems it's solving, as you move through feasibility, is this answering this problem, test it with customers. And I think if we can do that very speedily using technology, then we can get to market much more quickly.
Okay, that's interesting. And the structure that surrounds that process, you sounds like you've got a very interesting opportunity at Holland Barrett, given that there was no kind of formal product function. How are you thinking of kind of structuring the products and MPD teams going forward?
Well, it's interesting because this is my first global role, which is one of the reasons it's so exciting. And I'm still, I'm 8 weeks in, and really talking to a lot of experts that have run global teams before to understand what's the best way to set it up, centrally versus locally, and really picking lots of brains. And I haven't quite got to where I want to yet, but the exciting thing about the Holland Barrett teams, I'm creating an end-to-end product development team. So we've got everything from, the insight coming in one end and the packaging going out the other. Plus it's omni-channel, which, is also very exciting, how you do product development. So I think I've started with a reasonably traditional structure, but I think it will evolve into something that could potentially be market leading and set a bit of a way for the future.
Oh, right. Okay. Interesting. Because we certainly, it's been a long time since I worked for a retailer. It was kind of 2005, 2006. But when I was at Sainsbury's then, the products and buying teams were structured on a category by category basis. And I think that's still not necessarily, again, not the default, but there's quite a few retailers do that. I know of one or two now who are moving to what they kind of term like a pod structure, which is, there's a degree of kind of cross functionality. Are you seeing that as a trend across retail, or do most retailers still kind of build their teams on a category by category basis? I think
we're starting to see some of the big retailers move to more of a project-based product development team. I mean, that's certainly how I'm setting my team up. So they're on a project-based, and we're looking at customers' needs and missions rather than categories. And that leads to very different outputs. I have seen it in some of the other big retailers, but I've not seen it to the extent that I've taken it into Holland Barrett. So, the same way, I'm going to take a test and learn approach to it, and an iterative approach, and just see how it works. But definitely in terms of getting the customer at the heart of what you do, setting my team up in this way is really, really helpful. But there are so many more strands to it, because in health and wellness, I've got formulation experts, I've got nutritionists, I've got regulatory guys in my team. So it all kind of it's a very different setup anyway. And it's Holland Barrett's a 150-year-old business, but it's actually still it feels like a 150-year-old startup. It's quite entrepreneurial in the way things are done. And that's a double-edged sword, because in some ways it's a little bit Wild West, but in other ways you can get stuff done quickly without lots of treacle. So it's an exciting place at the moment. Yeah,
for sure. Well, it sounds like there's quite a few more stakeholders that you need to consider compared to, say, a food and drink retailer.
Less. I think in big food and drink organizations, there's too many stakeholders that have an opinion that probably isn't there. Every single person in my team is there for a reason, because they have a contribution to make to the end product. So actually there's less stakeholders to engage and sort of get their opinions. It's just a cross-functional team that are working really hard to create the best products.
Okay. And what do you, in terms of expectations about the performance of new products and the cost of new products? Well, one of my observations over the last 5 or 10 years of running Vypr and kind of having a lens across multiple stakeholders in the industry is that many businesses don't necessarily have a great grasp of what it's actually costing them to get products to market and what those products need to kind of generate to cover their costs. Do you think that's likely to change? What are the expectations for you going forward from that perspective?
Well, again, I'm here with a blank sheet of paper in terms of how we measure success. And I don't think I've ever to date in my career seen a really good way of measuring MPD success, or a really good indicator of how much it costs to get the products to market. So what I'm doing is taking all of those learnings from my career previously and applying them to make sure that we absolutely do get a good return. But what I don't want to do is to make it, it's really important for us at Holland Barrett because we are going through a big transformation at the moment. We've got a massive global ambition and growth targets, and I need to foster a culture of wanting to try things and learning from when it didn't go quite right, rather than being risk averse. And I think sometimes if you put too tight measurements around MPD, I think that what we need to foster is a quick decision making, go, no go. That's what takes the time and the money. And this iteration approach.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I've had 2 or 3 people on the podcast series so far make similar observations that yes, arguably the industry needs to kind of tighten up on innovation measurement and KPIs, but actually if you overdo it, you're going to kind of kill anybody's appetite for any degree of risk, really, which is where the kind of the big step forwards can come from.
I think it's the wasteful money that's spent because there's too many iterations, too many stakeholders, sloppy decision making, all of that sort of thing. That's what we've got to tighten up on. But actually, I'd 100 times rather launch 1,000 products and get 30% of them right than launch 500 products and get 10 of them right. It sounds an odd thing to say, but I think sometimes if we're going to take this test and learn approach, then you've got to put stuff out there, but you've got to quickly learn and adapt. And you can't beat people up when it goes wrong because, not that it goes wrong, or, when it isn't successful first time, because you've learned something from doing that activity.
So talking about people there, you mentioned, the teams and product developers within the food and drink industry. Many developers come from a chefing background, a restaurant background. You've probably got quite an interesting opportunity here within health and wellness. What skill sets do you think could flourish within product development going forward as it kind of as it builds as a career in a sector?
I mean, for me, the most important thing is mindset. It's having the right mindset and a huge amount of resilience, because you'll get a lot of knockbacks. You're basically I always say the best product developers are Alan Sugar with an encyclopedic knowledge of food in the food industry. You need to have that gut instinct, that business nous. You need to have a real, true, deep understanding of customers and what they want. That's really who I think we should have in our industry is people that will flourish in that sort of environment. But you need a huge amount of resilience. You come up against people every day that are the naysayers and the non-believers. And I'm not saying I've had that in Holland Barrett, by the way, but in my career I've had that. And I think you've just got to be able to have self-belief in what you're creating, but backed up obviously by data.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's interesting. That's actually a very similar answer to what I would give if asked about entrepreneurism. It's that resilience. You've got to kind of believe in what you're doing. You've got to be very, very passionate about it, but equally
determination.
Yeah, for sure.
But also you've got to listen and be curious as well. So you can't be so determined and resilient that you're closed down. I learn something new every day, and I really listen, and it just helps you grow and be informed. And I think you've got to be open to that, because the day you think you know everything, then you may as well give up and go home.
Yeah, for sure. So maybe kind of thinking about product now and maybe reflecting back at your time at Marks and Spencer's over the last 4 or 5 years. We've talked about kind of the ability at least to kind of tolerate failures and disappointments as long as you're kind of learning from them. What would be your kind of reflecting back the main failures? I think it's a bad word at times, but maybe a disappointment in terms of a product or a range that launched, and what did you learn from it and why?
I'm not going to pick a particular range or product. I think the bit that I still haven't cracked, which is the opportunity now, is how do we create very, very healthy solutions for customers that taste great and are convenient but still feel fresh.
Right. Okay.
And I hadn't cracked that to date, but watch this space because we're getting there. I think there's this sort of tension between convenience, freshness, health. That's a very, very difficult one to crack. And I think it needs some really innovative and creative thinking to get the right solution.
That's interesting. One of the sectors that I'm quite fascinated by at the moment is the plant-based sector. I think they're doing some very interesting things from innovation, because they're having to be very kind of scientific and R&D led. I mean, it's kind of genuine kind of manufacturing innovation and technology innovation. What do you think, not just food and drink, but other sectors can learn from what that plant-based sector is doing at the moment?
I mean, I think it's interesting because actually a lot of the innovations happening with some of our biggest meat manufacturers. Yeah. And I'm really impressed with the way that some of those quite traditional industries have, take someone like Finnebrog, have recognized that, they've got one industry, but they have to change their thinking because the world's going in a different direction. I mean, it's interesting because Holland Barrett were the very, very first people to introduce vegan food to the market many years ago, and it was long before it sort of caught on as a trend. I've been so impressed by the work that's going on in that sector. I think the solving the problems of I want to eat something that tastes like meat, but I don't want to eat meat. I think cracked that really, really well. I'm a bit worried that it's starting, for something that a lot of customers, and there's lots of different needs in the vegan market, but one of them is people want to eat more healthily, eat more plants. And I'm a little bit worried that it's going too far down an ultra processed route and a science route. And I think we need to balance that with some more fresh, natural solutions. But I honestly, I think it's the biggest shift I've seen in terms of real innovation in the food industry for a long time. And there's some incredible, I mean, every day I discover something new. What you can do with a mushroom nowadays, I don't know.
No, it's impressive. I saw
it's really impressive.
I saw the guys at Wiki Kitchen on some Instagram feed the other week doing a big kind of barbecue thing in the States, and they were using these kind of mushroom steaks, mushroom patties, and they looked amazing. Actually, they were very, very impressive.
Mushroom fiber. I mean, there's some incredible meat substitutes being made out of mushroom fiber now, and it's mushroom fiber is an adaptogen, I think. So could really, really. I mean, it's just really impressive. It's difficult to keep up sometimes. Actually, I spend a huge amount of my time researching nowadays because that industry is moving so quickly.
Yeah, it is for sure. Which kind of leads nicely onto the opposite question. What's the best thing that you've seen? Maybe not necessarily kind of M&S and Holland Barrett, but just across the market in the last year or so. What's the best?
Well, I was thinking. I thought this question might come up, so I was thinking about this, and actually, I thought what made the biggest impression on me in the last couple of months that I've seen. And obviously I've got these new industries of supplements and beauty as well as food now. And there's an incredible company. They actually launched in 2020. So it's more than the last 6 months, but they're only based in the States. They're not in the UK. And it's a company called A System. Okay. And what they've got is it's a range of supplements, but they are backed by medicine and science, and they're solution focused. So it's not vitamin A, vitamin D. It's actually solving customers' problems. But I think what makes them unique and differentiated from anything else I've seen is they've got this kind of dual approach, science and medicine on one side, but aesthetic design and branding on the other. So not only are they solving a problem, but they look beautiful. That it's a refillable type model. So they've designed an absolutely stunning tin, but you want to keep on your. I mean, it looks like some sort of piece of art that you want to keep on the side, and then you refill your supplements. So I think taking that approach of design and science and medicine is something very new, and it really stuck with me. I was very impressed.
Yeah, that's interesting because I as someone who I have some supplements, but I'm certainly not a kind of a heavily engaged shopper within that category, I find it a little baffling at times, the kind of vitamin C, vitamin D, all the different things. I think there is an assumption that consumers know what these things do, but it sounds like they've completely flipped it to a use case driven. And right, okay.
So I mean, it would be a combination of ingredients that would help you sleep better, but they'd have the science and medicine to back it up. But normally you'd get somebody going down a science and medicine route, or you'd get somebody going down a design route. You see a lot of the influencers with very, but they're not proven. And I think what they've spotted is there is something there. By the way, you should just take vitamin D if you don't take anything else, because most people in this country are short on vitamin D. Right, that's what I've learned in the last 8 weeks. No, but I mean, the supplements thing is interesting, because we're part of our transformation at Holland Barrett is that we are taking a much more holistic approach to health and wellness. So one of the reasons I'm there is to create amazing food that will help people eat a really nutritious diet, which then you supplement with supplements rather than taking supplements because you're leading an unhealthy lifestyle. So, it's an interesting lens to look at it through. Yeah.
We're nearly out of time, sadly, but the final question before we close, what maybe thinking back to food and drink now, but what do you think the innovation sector does amazingly well that's either not understood externally or just not kind of talked about particularly?
Well, I think what the food sector does really well in the innovation sector is the amount of hard work that happens behind the scenes to get a product to market. And I'd use the analogy of modern art. You see people go and look at a painting and they say, well, I could do that. But you don't know why it works so well. And I always roll out this Edison quote that innovation's 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. Yeah. And I honestly don't think people realize the hard work and the difficulty of turning an idea into a product on the shelf. Yeah. I think that's completely hidden. And it's always, when you start to tell people what it involves to get a product that people want to buy at a price they can afford it, that can go through a supply chain, that has enough life on it, it's very, very difficult work, and it's very skilled work. And I think a lot of people think with NPD, you just think of an idea and you cook it up in the kitchen and then it goes on the shelf. But that hidden behind the scenes work that goes on to create successful products is, I think, one of the best kept secrets.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's a nice note to end on. Sadly, we are out of time. So April, all that remains for me is to say thank you very much for giving up your time today. It's been a really fascinating discussion. We will no doubt do it again in due course. So thank you to those listeners tuning in, and thank you to April Preston, Global Product Director at Holland Barrett, and we will see you again very soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Bye-bye.